We're about to embark on a journey that will make your worst Monday morning feel like a holiday. Think your job is tough? Well, buckle up, because we're going to find out why you wouldn't survive 5 minutes as a Victorian factory child. Picture this. It's 1840 Manchester. The air tastes like coal dust and broken dreams. You're 7 years old barefoot and about to begin a 12-hour shift that would break most grown adults today. Your smartphone would make you a god in this era. But tonight, you're just another piece of meat for the industrial grinder. Close your eyes and let me paint you a picture so grim, so utterly horrific, that you'll drift off thanking every deity that you weren't born 180 years ago. The year is 1840, and childhood as we know, it simply doesn't exist. At 7 years old, you'd already be considered a seasoned worker. No school, no playtime, no bloody childhood at all. Just endless hours of back-breaking labor. Imagine waking up at 4 a.m. every single day, not to your mom's gentle voice, but to the shriek of a factory whistle that sounds like a banshee's wail. That's your alarm clock, mate. No snooze button in this nightmare. You'd stumble through dark, narrow streets that smell like human waste and rotting food. The lucky ones had shoes. Most went barefoot, even in winter. Picture walking on frozen cobblestones that would cut your feet to ribbons. As those massive factory doors swing open, you'd be hit with a wall of heat, noise, and the most god-awful smell imaginable. Cotton dust mixed with machine oil, human sweat, and something else. Something that smells suspiciously like death. The machines tower over you like mechanical monsters, their gears grinding and wheels spinning with enough force to crush a grown man. And you, at barely 4 feet tall, are expected to work alongside these beasts for the next 12 hours. The overseer's walking around with a leather strap, looking for any excuse to use it. Making eye contact is insubordination. Working too slowly earns you a beating. Working too quickly makes the other kids look bad, which also earns you a beating. Your tiny hands are already bleeding from yesterday's work, but there's no time for healing. No sick days in Victorian England, mate. You work injured, you work sick, or you don't eat. Simple as that. 12 hours, 720 minutes, 43,200 seconds of pure hell. And this isn't a one-off. This is every single day of your miserable existence. The work bell's ringing now, and your nightmare is about to begin. But before we dive into the horror show, let me tell you some secrets about Victorian factories that they definitely don't teach in school. Here's something they don't teach you in school, mate. The Industrial Revolution wasn't just about steam engines and progress. It was the largest child trafficking operation in human history, disguised as economic advancement. By 1833, there were over 84,000 children under 14 working in British textile mills alone. That's more kids than live in entire cities today. But here's the kicker. 90% of them died before reaching 30. The government's solution? The Factory Act of 1833, which mercifully limited children aged 9 to 13 to only 9 hours of work per day. 9 bloody hours. Your gaming session last weekend was longer than a Victorian child's legal work limit. But here's the secret the history books won't tell you. Factory owners had a revolting system called pauper apprentices. They'd literally buy orphan children from workhouses like livestock, promising training, but delivering slavery. These kids were essentially cattle with a prettier name. Bought, sold, and worked to death with zero legal protection. The contracts lasted 7 years, if you survived that long, which most didn't. The most disturbing part? Parents willingly sold their children to these factories, not because they were evil, but because the alternative was watching them starve in the streets. Imagine being so desperate. A typical apprentice contract would cost the factory owner about £5, less than what you'd spend on lunch today. For that price, they owned a human being for 7 years. The return on investment was bloody brilliant. Factory towns sprang up overnight, designed like prisons. Workers lived in company housing, shopped at company stores, and were paid in company scrip, fake money that could only be spent at inflated prices in their shops. The factory dormitories were worse than modern prison cells. 12 children to a room, sleeping in shifts because there weren't enough beds. When the day shift went to work, the night shift would crawl into their still warm beds. Sanitation was non-existent. 1 toilet for every 100 workers. No running water, and rats the size of cats. Disease spread like wildfire through these human warehouses. The food was deliberately kept just above starvation level. Thin gruel, stale bread, and water that was often contaminated with sewage. Factory owners discovered that hungry workers were more compliant workers. But the real horror wasn't the living conditions. It was what happened inside those factory walls. The jobs these children were forced to do would make your stomach turn. The most common job for children was scavenging, crawling under massive spinning machines while they were running, collecting cotton waste and cleaning oil from moving gears. Think about that for a moment. These machines had no safety guards, no emergency stops, no bloody concern for human life. Children as young as 5 would crawl beneath spinning wheels that could tear them apart in seconds. The piecers had it slightly better. They only had to tie broken threads on moving machines. Of course, this meant reaching into spinning machinery with their bare hands, often while half asleep from exhaustion. Factory records from the time are filled with entries like Mary lost 2 fingers to spinning wheel, or Thomas crushed by falling cotton bale. These weren't accidents. They were inevitable consequences. The overseers carried leather straps called billies, thick strips of leather designed to leave welts, but not permanent marks. Smart business practice, really. Bruised workers could still work. Broken workers cost money. Discipline was brutal and arbitrary. Talking earned you a beating. Sitting down earned you a beating. Working too slowly, working too quickly, looking tired, looking alert. Everything was an excuse for violence. Silent system was particularly cruel. Children were forbidden to speak, sing, or make any noise whatsoever during their 12-hour shifts. Imagine being 7 years old and not being allowed to make a sound for half your waking life. Windows were nailed shut to maintain proper humidity for the cotton. Fresh air was considered bad for the machinery, so workers breathed the same stale, dust-filled air for hours on end. The temperature inside these mills could reach over 100 degrees Fahrenheit, with humidity levels that would make a tropical. Rainforests seemed dry. Children regularly collapsed from heat exhaustion. But here's what really gets me, mate. The factory owners genuinely believed they were doing these children a favor. They saw themselves as benevolent educators, teaching valuable skills to the undeserving poor. Medical records from the period show the true cost. Mill fever from cotton dust, black lung from coal particles, spinal deformities from constant bending, and malnutrition so severe that adult factory workers averaged just over 5 feet tall. Now that you understand the world these children lived in, let me tell you about some specific kids who tried to survive in this nightmare. Their stories will haunt your dreams. Meet Mary Ashworth, age 8, from a mill in Oldham. Her job title was scavenger, which sounds harmless enough until you learn what it actually involved. Mary was human lint collector. Picture this. You're the size of a large dog, crawling beneath machinery that could crush you like a grape. The floor is slick with oil, cotton waste, and God knows what else. One wrong move and you're mince. Mary's workday started at 5 a.m. when she'd crawl under the first spinning frame. The space was so tight she had to wiggle on her belly, using her fingernails to scrape cotton fibers from the machinery. The cotton waste she collected wasn't just fluffy fibers. It was mixed with machine oil, metal shavings, and worse. Desatimo. Hands were constantly cut by sharp edges, leaving bloody smears on everything she touched. But here's the truly horrific part. The machines never stopped running. Mary had to time her movements perfectly, sliding under spinning wheels that could catch her hair or clothing and drag her to her death. Every few minutes, she'd have to back out from under the machinery, dragging her collection of oily, bloody cotton waste. Then it was on to the next machine, and the next, and the next. The overseers would walk above her, their heavy boots sometimes stepping on her fingers or back as she crawled below. If she cried out in pain, that earned her a beating for disrupting production. Mary lasted 3 months in this job, not because she died, though that was the usual outcome for scavengers. No, Mary was lucky. She only lost 2 fingers and developed what they called mill fever. Mill fever was basically lung disease from inhaling cotton fibers all day. Mary would cough up blood and cotton dust for the rest of her short life, but she was still expected to work. Here's the twisted part that'll make your blood boil. The factory owner docked Mary's wages for damaging company property when her blood got on the cotton. Your worst boss has nothing on Victorian industrialists. After losing her fingers, Mary was promoted to piecer, tying broken threads on the spinning machines. Same danger, slightly less crawling. She was told to be grateful for this advancement. Mary's story was tragically common. Thousands of children just like her spent their days crawling under death machines, collecting scraps like human insects. But her tale gets even darker. Mary's mill fever got progressively worse. She'd wake up each morning coughing blood onto her straw mattress, but missing work meant losing her bed in the dormitory. So she worked with lungs that were slowly turning black. The cotton fibers had embedded themselves so deeply in her lungs that every breath was agony. Modern doctors would call it severe pneumoconiosis, but Victorian factory doctors just called it malingering. Mary died at age 12, 4 years after starting work. The official cause of death was listed as consumption, but really she drowned in her own blood-filled lungs. Her funeral cost more than she'd earned in her entire life. The factory replaced Mary within hours. There was always another desperate child waiting for work. Her few possessions, a torn dress and a wooden comb, were passed to the next scavenger. Now let's meet Tommy Sullivan, age 6. His profession was even more horrifying than Mary's. Tommy was a climbing boy, what we'd call a chimney sweep. But that innocent term hides something truly monstrous. Before you think how bad could it be, let me paint you a picture that'll make your skin crawl. Tommy's workday started at 4 a.m., when he'd be stripped naked and forced up chimneys barely wider than his tiny body. These chimneys were still warm from the previous night's fires, covered in caustic soot that would literally burn the skin off his back and knees. The soot wasn't just carbon, it contained acids that ate through flesh. Tommy couldn't see anything in those chimneys. He had to navigate by feel, scraping soot with his fingernails until they bled, breathing toxic fumes that would turn his lungs black as coal. The narrowest chimneys were only 7 inches square. Tommy had to dislocate his shoulders to fit through, scraping his way up in complete darkness while soot filled his mouth, nose, and lungs. If he got stuck, which happened regularly, his master would light a fire at the bottom of the chimney to encourage him to climb faster. Imagine being trapped in a stone tube while smoke and flames chase you upward. Tommy's knees and elbows were permanently raw from scraping against rough stone. His spine was curved from constantly hunching in narrow spaces. At 6 years old, he looked like a twisted old man, but the physical damage was nothing compared to what happened to Tommy's mind. Being trapped in dark, narrow spaces for hours on end drove many climbing boys completely mad. Tommy developed what we'd now recognize as severe claustrophobia and PTSD. He'd wake up screaming, clawing at the walls, convinced he was trapped in a chimney. But there was no concept of mental health treatment for working children. The soot Tommy scraped wasn't just dirty, it was carcinogenic. Chimney sweeps had the highest rates of scrotal cancer in Victorian England. They called it soot wart, and it was always fatal. Tommy's fingernails were worn down to bloody stumps from scraping stone and mortar. His master would rub salt into the wounds to toughen them up. The pain was so intense that many boys passed out while working. The chimneys in grand houses could be over 100 feet tall, with multiple twists and turns. Tommy would spend hours lost in these stone mazes, sometimes not emerging until the next day. If a chimney collapsed, while Tommy was inside, which happened more often than you'd think, his master would simply walk away. Digging out a dead climbing boy cost more than buying a new one. Tommy's training involved being lowered headfirst into chimneys with a rope around his ankles. If he didn't work fast enough, his master would let the rope slip, dropping him deeper into the darkness. The chemical burns from the soot were so severe that Tommy's skin would literally peel off in sheets. Fresh wounds were exposed to more caustic soot every day, creating a cycle of agony that never ended. Tommy learned to dislocate his own joints to fit through impossibly narrow spaces. 6-year-olds shouldn't know how to dislocate their shoulders, but survival demanded impossible skills. The worst part was cleaning hot chimneys. Tommy would be sent up flues that were still burning, racing against time and flames. Many climbing boys were literally cooked alive in active chimneys. Tommy's master made good money from his services, about 2 shillings per chimney. Tommy himself received nothing except barely enough food to keep him small enough to fit in. The narrowest flues. At age 9, Tommy got stuck in a particularly narrow chimney and suffocated. His body wasn't discovered for 3 days. The homeowner complained about the smell before anyone thought to check the chimney. Tommy's death was recorded as misadventure, and his master faced no consequences. The next day, he bought another, climbing boy from the workhouse. The machine of exploitation rolled on. The mill girls of Lowell weren't children, but their story reveals something even more disturbing about what happened to kids who survived factory work. These were the lucky ones who lived long enough to become teenagers. Sarah McKenna started as a factory child at age 7 and graduated to the Lowell Mills at 16. By then, her spine was permanently curved from years of bending over machines, and she looked decades older than her age. The Lowell system was marketed as a moral experiment, giving young women respectable employment and education. The reality was a sophisticated form of slavery dressed up in pretty marketing. Sarah worked 14-hour days in temperatures over 100 degrees, with windows nailed shut to maintain humidity. The noise was so loud that mill girls communicated through hand signals because shouting couldn't be heard. The boarding houses where mill girls lived were overcrowded dormitories with beds stacked 3 high. Sarah shared a bed with 2 other girls, sleeping in shifts because the mills ran 24 hours a day. Factory rules governed every aspect of their lives. Curfew at 10 p.m., mandatory church attendance, no male visitors, no alcohol, no novels. Breaking any rule meant instant dismissal. And homelessness. Sarah's wages were automatically sent to her family back home. She received just enough pocket money for basic necessities, keeping her trapped in the company system like an indentured servant. The cotton dust in the air was so thick that Sarah would cough up blood every morning. Mill girls called it mill fever. But factory doctors insisted it was just hysteria and prescribed cold baths. After 5 years in the mills, Sarah's lungs were so damaged she could barely climb stairs. But she was still considered healthy compared to girls who'd started younger. The damage compounded over time. Sarah tried to organize a strike for shorter hours and better conditions. The response was swift. She was blacklisted from every mill in New England and forced into prostitution to survive. She died at 22 from complications related to lung disease and malnutrition. Her obituary praised her as a moral example of industrious womanhood. The irony was lost on everyone. But if you think textile workers had it bad, wait until you hear about the children who made your matches. Their story is so horrific it seems like fiction. Let's talk about the children who made your great-great-grandmother's matches. These kids worked with white phosphorus, a chemical so toxic it would literally make their bones glow green in the dark. Meet Annie Besant's match girls, children as young as 6 who dipped wooden sticks into vats of white phosphorus paste. They had no idea they were handling one of the most poisonous substances known to man. The phosphorus paste had to be applied by hand, meaning these children spent 12-hour days with their fingers immersed in toxic chemicals. Their hands would literally glow at night like something from a horror movie. Within months of starting work, the children developed phossy jaw. Their jawbones would begin to rot from the inside out. The infection would spread, causing their teeth to fall out and their gums to turn black. The smell from their rotting jaws was so horrible that even other factory workers couldn't stand to be near them. These children became living corpses, still expected to work while their faces literally decomposed. The white phosphorus caused their bones to weaken and fracture spontaneously. Children would be working normally, when suddenly their arm or leg would simply snap under the weight of normal movement. Factory owners knew about the dangers. White phosphorus was banned for military use because it was considered too inhumane for warfare. But it was perfectly legal to expose children to it for 12 hours a day. The phosphorus would seep into their bloodstream, causing organ failure, brain damage, and a slow, agonizing death. But the matches produced were of slightly higher quality, so the practice continued. Children with advanced phossy jaw would have their jawbones surgically removed without anesthetic. They'd survive for a few more months as faceless horrors, before the infection finally killed them. The Match Girls strike of 1888 finally brought attention to these conditions. But by then, thousands of children had already died from phosphorus poisoning, their deaths recorded as natural causes. Annie Besant's investigation revealed that match company profits had increased 300% while using child labor and toxic phosphorus. The human cost was irrelevant to the bottom line. Even after safer red phosphorus became available, Many factories continued using the toxic white variety because it was cheaper. Profit margins mattered more than children's lives. Now, let me share some statistics that'll make your modern problems seem laughably trivial. In 1840, the average factory child worked 3,900 hours per year. That's more than 2 full-time modern jobs. Your annual vacation time is longer than most Victorian children lived. The average lifespan of a factory worker was just 17 years. 17 bloody years from birth to death, and most of that was pure misery. Factory accidents were so common they weren't even recorded properly. Conservative estimates suggest that 40% of factory children suffered permanent disabilities within their first year of work. The pay was deliberately kept at starvation levels. A child's weekly wages couldn't even buy a single meal at a modern fast food restaurant. They worked for literal crumbs. Factory owners calculated that it was cheaper to let workers die and replace them than to improve safety conditions. Human life had a specific monetary value, and it was depressingly low. The psychological damage was immeasurable. Children who survived factory work were described as old before their time, with dead eyes and broken spirits. Childhood trauma on an industrial scale. Malnutrition was so severe that adult factory workers averaged just over 5 feet tall. Generations of children were literally stunted by industrial exploitation. The air quality in factories was so poor that workers' lung capacity was reduced by 40% within their first year. Breathing clean air became a luxury that few could afford. Disease spread like wildfire through factory dormitories. Cholera, typhus, and tuberculosis were constant companions. Children would go to sleep healthy and wake up dying. The legal system offered no protection. Children couldn't testify against adults. Unions were illegal, and factory owners literally owned the courts. Justice was a foreign concept. Even Sunday, the supposed day of rest, was filled with mandatory religious services designed to teach children that their suffering was God's will and that questioning authority was sinful. But perhaps the most horrifying aspect wasn't the physical suffering. It was how completely normalized this brutality became. Society convinced itself that child labor was moral and necessary. Think about your worst day at work, mate. Maybe your computer crashed, or your boss was particularly difficult, or the air conditioning wasn't working properly. Now imagine that's your best day. Your biggest workplace complaint is probably slow Wi-Fi or cold coffee. These children would have killed for a glass of clean water or a single hour of rest. Perspective is a hell of a thing. You live in an age where child labor laws protect kids until they're teenagers, where education is mandatory, where safety regulations prevent most industrial accidents. These weren't rights. They were fought for with blood. Every convenience you take for granted, the 8-hour workday, weekends, sick leave, safety equipment, was paid for by children like Mary, Tommy, Sarah, and Annie. Their suffering bought your freedom. When you complain about having to work late, remember that late for a Victorian child meant collapsing from exhaustion at their machine. When you're tired, they were dying. Your smartphone has more computing power than entire Victorian cities. You carry in your pocket technology that would have made you a god in their world. Yet you still find things to complain about. The food you throw away each week could have fed a factory family for months. The clothes you donate or discard represent more wealth than most Victorian workers saw in their entire lives. Your access to healthcare, education, entertainment, and basic human dignity would have been incomprehensible to these children. You're living their impossible dream. Yet somehow, we've managed to forget the cost. We treat our privileges as entitlements, our comfort as the natural order. We've lost sight of how recently things were truly horrible. The children who built our modern world never lived to see it. They died in darkness so you could live in light. Their sacrifice deserves more than historical footnotes. So the next time you're having a tough day, remember Mary crawling under death machines, Tommy trapped in burning chimneys, Sarah coughing, blood in overcrowded dormitories. Their ghosts whisper through every labor law, every safety regulation, every protection you enjoy. You wouldn't last 5 minutes in their world, and that's exactly how it should be. Now, as we near the end of our journey through this nightmare, let your breathing slow down. Let your muscles relax. You're safe in your warm bed, centuries away from their suffering. Close your eyes and feel grateful for every breath of clean air, every moment of safety, every choice you have that they never did. Your freedom was bought with their blood. The factories are silent now, mate. The machines have stopped grinding up children. The overseers have put down their straps. The nightmare is over, at least for tonight. You're lying in a bed that's warmer and safer than anything Mary, Tommy, or Sarah ever knew. Your pillow is softer than their entire world. Rest easy in that knowledge. Let the horrors of their world fade into the darkness where they belong. You've honored their memory by listening to their stories. Now let sleep carry you to better dreams. The work bells have stopped ringing. The factory whistles are silent. There are no overseers prowling. In the darkness, no machines waiting to claim small fingers. You wouldn't last 5 minutes in their world. 5 minutes crawling under spinning death machines. 5 minutes breathing toxic air. 5 minutes living their nightmare. But you don't have to, mate. You live in an age of miracles they could never imagine. Every day you wake up healthy is a victory they never achieved. Their suffering wasn't meaningless if we remember it, if we honor it, if we never let it happen again. Sleep peacefully, knowing you're protected by laws written in their blood. The children of the Industrial Revolution can finally rest. Their work is done, their stories told. Now it's time for you to rest too. Let your mind drift away from the factories, away from the suffering, towards peaceful sleep. You've earned this rest simply by being born in a better time. Sleep now, knowing that tomorrow you'll wake up free, healthy, and safe. The nightmare belongs to the past, and you belong to a better future. So there you have it, mate. Why you wouldn't last a day as a Victorian factory child. Your biggest workplace complaint is probably the Wi-Fi being slow, or your coffee being cold. These children lived in a world where a 12-hour shift was mercy, where losing fingers was just Tuesday, where breathing clean air was a luxury beyond imagination. You wouldn't last 5 minutes. Not 5 minutes in their world of spinning death machines and toxic air. Not 5 minutes crawling under industrial monsters. Close your eyes now. Drift away to a time when your biggest worry is your alarm clock, not the factory whistle at dawn. Sleep well, knowing you live in an age of miracles they could never imagine, where children go to school instead of factories, where safety laws protect the innocent. Their ghosts can rest now, knowing their stories have been told, their suffering remembered, their sacrifice honored. You wouldn't last 5 minutes, but you don't have to. You're safe, you're warm, you're free. Dream of clean air and safety regulations, of 8-hour workdays and weekends, of all the things they died to give you. Sleep like a Victorian child, if they ever got the chance. Rest like they never could. Breathe like they never would. The factory bells are silent. The machines have stopped. The nightmare is over. At least for tonight. Rest easy, mate. You've earned it simply by being born in a better time. Simply by living their impossible dream. If you survived this bloody tale, smash that subscribe button for tomorrow's revelation. Because we're diving into why pirates actually hated gold, and what they preferred instead will make you laugh, like a rum-drunk sailor. Click now and sleep like a Victorian child, if they ever got the chance.